Welcome in. We've got a truly fascinating journey lined up for you today. It's an expedition into one of the most opaque and frequently misunderstood political systems in the world.
It really is.
Yeah, we are diving deep into the inner workings of Vladimir Putin's Russia. Because if you've ever, watched a spy thriller or seen a massive news headline and thought to yourself, is there really just one guy sitting at the end of a ridiculously long table controlling every single thing that happens in that country?
That image is everywhere, right?
It is. So today's deep dive is tailor-made for you. We're going to examine excerpts from a phenomenal book called The New Autocracy, Information, Politics, and Policy in Putin's Russia, edited by Daniel Treisman.
It's a fantastic compilation of research.
And our mission here is to shortcut your way to being incredibly well-informed on this. We want to shatter those tired Bond villain cliches and look at the actual mechanics of how high-stakes decisions are made in the Kremlin.
But before we jump into the material, it is absolutely essential that I make something very clear to you, our listener.
Right, the disclaimer.
Yes. This deep dive touches on heavily politically charged concepts and global events. As your guides, we are impartially reporting on the factual findings and the data provided in the sources. We are never taking any sides, left-wing, right-wing, or otherwise.
Exactly.
Our sole goal today is simply to convey the ideas contained in the original source material, not to endorse them or inject any personal political beliefs.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the core thesis we are looking at today is it's a massive paradigm shift from what we usually hear.
It completely flips the script.
Right. These sources argue that modern Russia isn't some neo-Soviet replica. It's not just a giant kleptocracy, and it's definitely not a well-oiled KGB machine where everyone marches in lockstep.
Far from it.
Instead, it is this messy, surprisingly fragile system known as an informational autocracy, and it's constantly struggling to manage a society that has modernized incredibly fast.
That modernization piece is the foundation of everything else we're going to discuss today. It's where the data in our sources really challenges the conventional wisdom.
Because we usually picture it as, I don't know, very stagnant.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But between 1999 and roughly 2011, Russia underwent a rapid modernization.
Yeah.
We are talking about a true societal boom. GDP almost doubled during that window.
Wow.
Yeah, living standards surged, millions logged onto the internet. It transformed into a highly wired, post-industrial, consumer-driven society.
I remember reading those stats and being blown away by the cell phone data. The sources note that when Putin took office, barely anyone had a mobile phone. But by 2011, there were, 1.8 cell phone subscriptions for every single person?
Yes, the connectivity explosion was unprecedented. And this brings us to the central paradox of the regime.
Right.
As the citizens became more educated and highly connected, their political attitudes naturally modernized. By 2011 and 2012, this growing middle class started demanding political participation.
Which led to those massive street protests in Moscow.
Precisely. And the Kremlin's response in 2012 wasn't to roll tanks down the street and go back to the Soviet era. It was a calculated attempt to mentally and politically freeze this newly modernized society.
Because they saw that societal demand as an existential threat.
Exactly. The success of their own economic policies created a population that wanted more freedom.
So how do you freeze a connected society without going full Stalin? The text uses the term informational autocracy for this. Can you break down what that actually looks like?
Sure. The sources draw heavily on work by Daniel Treisman and Sergei Guryev to make a really vital distinction here. If you think about 20th century dictators, the Stalins, the Pinochets.
The ones relying on mass violence?
Right. Total media blackouts, widespread terror. The goal was to keep the population terrified. But modern informational autocrats operate entirely differently.
Because mass violence in a modern society is too costly.
Exactly. It triggers capital flight, causes brain drain, and frankly, if a leader resorts to mass violence, everyone with a smartphone can instantly see that the leader has lost control.
It breaks the illusion.
It shatters it completely. So instead of sheer terror, they rule by manipulating information. The goal is to convince citizens that the leader is uniquely benevolent and hyper-competent.
And they do this through, co-opted media and fake news.
Yes, quietly co-opting media owners, spreading sophisticated fake news, and using targeted internet trolls.
Which brings up a really recognizable name from the text. A guy who was essentially running this exact playbook as a freelancer.
Yevgeny Prigozhin.
Right.
Long before he became infamous for his mercenary group, The sources highlight how he was basically a government contractor running massive internet troll farms.
Just flooding the zone with pro-regime comments.
Yes, grounding out dissent online.
Yeah.
You disable opponents not by throwing them in gulags immediately, but through smear campaigns, endless tax audits, legal harassment. You only use violent repression as an absolute last resort because it damages the brand, so to speak.
That makes total sense.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, understanding this model is absolutely essential. It decodes how modern authoritarian regimes across the globe sustain power in the digital age.
It's about controlling the narrative, not just brute force. Well, let's talk about the people supposedly enforcing that narrative. We constantly hear stories in the West about the Siloviki.
Ah, yes. The force ministries.
Right, the former KGB, the FSB, the military guys. The assumption is that these guys are the undisputed puppet masters, like a shadowy cabal pulling all the strings.
It's a very popular narrative, but the source material provides a harsh reality check on that.
Because they aren't actually running everything.
No, the Siloviki are absolutely not a cohesive corporation. They are deeply fragmented, they are split into fiercely competing clans, and they completely lack common leadership.
Wait, really? Because they share that intelligence background, I always assumed they just dominated the government?
Look at the numbers in the text. The presence of Siloviki in top government positions actually peaked way back around 2004.
Wow, that long ago.
Yeah, at about 40% of the cabinet. And since then, their share has been steadily declining. By 2012, it was lower than it had been in the early 90s.
Replaced by who? Business people.
Private business people and career bureaucrats,
Yeah.
exactly.
Here's where it gets really interesting. There's a specific story in the text from 2011 that illustrates this perfectly. It involves a massive corporate battle over an Arctic exploration deal.
This is a remarkable case study. You had billionaire oligarch Mikhail Fridman fighting a massive battle over a highly lucrative Arctic oil deal with BP.
And who was on the other side?
Igor Sechin. He's the head of state oil giant Rosneft, a former intelligence officer and widely considered one of Putin's absolute closest confidants, the quintessential Silovik.
Right, so if the KGB dominance theory is true, Sechin just makes a phone call and crushes the businessman instantly.
That is exactly what you would expect. But Fridman used a shareholder agreement to legally block the multi-billion-dollar deal. Sechin was furious, but Fridman didn't back down.
And he won.
He actually won. He forced BP to abandon the deal with Sechin's state company. The private businessman humiliated the top Silovik.
That is wild.
It proves the regime isn't just a rigid security state. It's an arena, a chaotic battleground where different elites fight for corrupt rents and massive budgets. The Siloviki are powerful players, but they don't always win.
But if everyone is just constantly fighting for their slice of the pie, how does the government actually function?
Well, the sources lay out two completely different systems of Kremlin decision-making that operate simultaneously. Let's start with System 1, which is called normal politics or autopilot.
Okay.
This revolves around a process called Solglasovania, which translates to the sign-off system.
And this sign-off process sounds like an absolute nightmare.
It is a brutal zero-sum bureaucratic marathon. Any major policy has to get official sign-offs from multiple ministries and state actors with competing interests.
And they don't play nice.
Not at all.
Okay.
The text mentions bureaucrats literally planting fake news stories to ruin a rival minister's reputation, or having police jail members of an opposing faction on trumped-up charges.
All just to win a policy dispute.
Yes. Cutthroat bureaucratic warfare. That's System 1. But then you have System 2, which is manual control.
Which is when Putin personally steps in.
Right. When the infighting paralyzes the government. But the sources reveal a surprising quirk here. Despite his global image as an absolute dictator who micromanages everything, he is often incredibly diffident.
I found this detail so surprising. A proposal reaches his desk after this huge bureaucratic war, and instead of giving a command, he just writes one word on it.
Rasmatrite.
Right. Which means...
It basically means, take this into consideration. He tosses the grenade back to his subordinates and forces them to keep fighting it out.
He just avoids taking a firm stance.
Yes, to avoid alienating key elite factions. And even if he does sign a decree, doesn't mean it happens in the real world.
Because of the implementation problem. The text calls it having legs, right?
Yes, Nogi. A policy has to have legs.
I love that visual.
It means a signed piece of paper will just die in a desk drawer, unless it has a dedicated human overseer with enough administrative capital to physically walk that paperwork through the resistant bureaucracy.
They have to badger and threaten people to actually implement the order.
Exactly. Without a powerful patron with strong legs, the policy evaporates.
So the formal state is incredibly clunky. What happens when a leader gets frustrated with that paralysis?
You see the degeneration of the state itself. Putin increasingly bypasses the formal institutions. He relies on informal curators or freelancers to handle critical state functions off the books.
Like outsourcing security.
Yes. Instead of relying on the Ministry of Interior in the Caucasus, he outsources Chechnya to Ramzan Kadyrov, letting him run it as a personal fiefdom.
And the sources mention the Donbass region in Ukraine in 2014, too.
Right, relying on private businessmen like Konstantin Malafeev to quietly fund volunteer fighters
Right.
instead of just using the formal military. The data backs this up. Putin's public, formal presidential decrees dropped to record lows in his third term as he shifted toward shadow management.
So what does this all mean for the formal institutions that supposedly represent the state, like the Russian parliament, the State Duma?
Well, the general consensus in the West is that the Duma is just a rubber stamp.
A glorified Xerox machine for the Kremlin.
Exactly. But looking deeper at the legislative behavior in the sources, the Duma is actually an elite battleground.
How so?
Non-executive actors like competing ministries or the Security Council use individual Duma deputies as proxies to submit bills on their behalf.
Why go through all that cloak and dagger stuff instead of submitting it officially?
Two reasons. First, to bypass that grueling Sogolasovania sign-off process. If agriculture knows economy will block their bill, they just hand it to a friendly Duma deputy to introduce directly.
Sneaky.
Second, to hide their fingerprints. If the presidential administration wants to pass a highly unpopular law, they don't want the president's name on it.
Legislative money laundering.
Exactly. The infamous Foreign Agents Law and the Rotenberg Law that compensated oligarchs for Western sanctions were both drafted in the presidential administration, but fronted by expendable deputies.
Do the deputies ever push back?
Rarely, and they are heavily punished. There's a memorable anecdote from 2012 about an Italian strike.
I remember reading this. Gennady Gudkov, right?
Yes. Opposition deputies led by Gudkov opposed a repressive anti-protest bill. They couldn't stop it, so they attempted an Italian strike, a massive coordinated filibuster.
By submitting endless amendments.
Hundreds of them.
Yeah.
Legally forcing the Duma to stay open until midnight, debating every single pointless amendment.
Did it work?
It humiliated the leadership on live TV for a few hours, but the leadership eventually just violated their own rules to force the bill through.
And what happened to Gudkov?
Stripped of his parliamentary mandate, removed his immunity, kicked out of the Duma entirely, and they permanently rewrote the rules to ensure it never happens again.
So overt resistance is crushed. But the sources also show how elites use the Duma's complex rules to totally hijack legislation right under the public's nose.
Yes, the second reading amendment tactic.
Walk us through that.
An elite faction takes a totally boring, harmless bill that already passed its first reading. Everyone ignores it. Then, during the second reading, a proxy deputy attaches a radical, sweeping amendment that has nothing to do with the original text.
The example in the text about Moscow is just wild.
It really is. In 2015, there was a bland bill about applying Russian civil legislation to minor transactions in Crimea, a total snooze fest.
Right.
But right before the second reading, an amendment was attached radically altering federal rules around unauthorized construction.
And the real-world consequence of that.
It gave Moscow authorities the legal cover for the night of the long shovels. In February 2016, they sent bulldozers overnight to demolish hundreds of small retail kiosks across the city, ruining thousands of livelihoods.
All based on an undebated amendment smuggled into an unrelated bill.
Exactly. And this proxy warfare happens in the upper house, the Federation Council, too. Vetoes aren't always about legislative disagreement.
They're weapons.
Yes. The Ministry of Finance once used the Federation Council to veto a budget bill sponsored by the Duma's own leadership. Pure bureaucratic warfare disguised as parliamentary procedure.
Which brings us to a really profound realization as we summarize everything today. The system we're looking at isn't a streamlined dictatorship running flawlessly on Soviet rails.
Not at all.
It's a messy, chaotic, constantly warring ecosystem. Bureaucratic factions planting fake news, proxy battles in the Duma, relying on informal curators because the state is paralyzed.
And holding it all together is a leader desperately trying to control information, maintaining the illusion of absolute control over a public that is surprisingly wired and educated. This raises an important question, and it's something I really want you to ponder long after this deep dive ends.
Go ahead.
If the entire stability of this regime relies on managing this delicate balance of warring elites and carefully manipulating information for a highly connected society,
Yeah.
what happens when those informal, personal networks begin to age and inevitably break down? Or when a fully digital generation permanently bypasses the informational firewall? A political system built entirely on balancing hidden conflicts and controlling a manufactured narrative is inherently fragile when that narrative finally escapes its grasp.
That is a brilliant thought to end on. A system that looks like solid steel from the outside, but might just be a complex house of cards on the inside. Thank you so much for joining us on this customized deep dive into the sources. We hope it gave you a real shortcut to being incredibly well informed.
It's been a pleasure to unpack all this data with you.
Keep questioning the consensus, keep looking beneath the headlines, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.